Well, it was a tough week for our Saints fans, and then tough week for both Saints and LSU. I can't imagine what Mike Detillier's show was like yesterday. WWL Radio TV New Orleans. Mike D joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, and the show is brought to you by Southern Ag Credit, financing life outside the city limits. From livestock to agribusiness and land loans, Southern Ag Credit has the experience and expertise to make your dream of owning land a reality. Powered by Southern Ag Credit in Ridgeland. That's Southern Ag Credit in Ridgeland. We welcome in Mike Detillier. Mike D, what was your show like yesterday?
Everybody was restless. Saints fans are one thing, LSU fans are another. That's all I can tell you. I think for some Saints fans, because there's been a couple generations, they don't harken back to the days when they were really bad. And so, they got used to winning with Sean and Drew Brees and everything else. And so I think it was the lack of effort more than anything against Tampa, where this team seemed almost like Dracula had visited them overnight. They played with no energy, nothing, and they got beat up by the Bucks. LSU fans are different because now you're watching an offense that the only thing we've seen better is 2019 with Joe Burrow, of the way they put up points, and their defense is absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. Whew. Not a surprise in the secondary, but because that was the weak point of this team. But how they are not winning up front along defensive line is shockingly bad.
Oh, yeah. So y'all hired, or they hired Pete Jenkins, who you and I have talked about for years. And I mean, he coached all the way back with Jackie Sherrill a million years ago. Guy's a legend. One of the best ever, top 3 or 4. All right. So LSU is 118th in defensive scoring efficiency. They're last in the Power 5. I can't even believe I'm saying that with the athletes that they sign year in, year out. How did we before we get into what Pete can do, and he's excellent, how did we get here, Mike, with LSU's defense?
Man, I really don't know. To be honest with you, if I had that answer, it'd be easy. I think they're not playing Perkins in the right spot. I mean, he's an edge rusher, and they're using him all across the board. And, the talk was, well, we're going to get him ready for the NFL. Man, to hell with that. Let the NFL get Perkins ready.
Exactly.
You paid to win games. And so I don't understand what Matt House is doing with him. And defensive line, it's been a myriad of issues, but part of it, too, is they're not well coached along defensive line. Jamar Cain was a defensive line coach from a year ago, and he left right after National Signing Day in February to join Vance Joseph, who he had ties with, as the defensive line coach, pass rush specialist with the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton. Gerald Chapman had taken over as the defensive line coach for the spring, but Brian did a kind of national search, and he hired Jimmy Lindsey, who had been the defensive line coach at South Carolina. Jimmy had a major medical issue in the summer, and will not coach this year. But Chapman had left, and he took over the defensive line coaching position at Tulane. So they had to go out and they got John Jancic, who was on the staff. John's never coached defensive line before in his life. He's been a linebackers coach.
Good Lord.
And so, it was so funny. I talked to Pete Jenkins twice last week. We speak a couple times a week just because, Pete is sort of I guess an advisor, I guess would be the best terms, two different coaches that he works with their teams during the spring and during the summer. Nick Saban at Alabama, Kirby Smart at Georgia. He's worked at Kentucky. I think the last place he worked with was at Oregon. He's worked with their defensive line.
Dan Lanning. Okay.
Yeah, because Dan was at Georgia.
Sure.
And Pete got to know him through there, and Dan's brought him in more than a few times, I should say, to help with defensive line technical work. And then, he also has Louisiana Line Camp here down in Thibodaux, and a big seminar he does every summer in Houston, coaching and perfecting the techniques of NFL defensive line. So he works with probably 75 to 80 defensive linemen who plays in the NFL, and also works with guys as they prepare for the NFL draft. So Pete's kept busy for an 80-something-year-old guy.
Wow.
And so we talked a couple times last week, and man, when he called me Sunday and he was like, "Well, Hoss, guess what? One more ride for the old man." I'm like, "What? You got to be kidding." And he's like, "Yeah, one more ride for me." And so he said he's no miracle worker. And like he said, I'll do my best, try to help with the technical part of the game. But LSU's getting pushed around up front. And, Brian, who he has never met until yesterday.
Really?
They have talked on the phone. He was at LSU, I think, for a little over a week in February, and Brian was recruiting, so he never actually got to meet Brian Kelly. And so yesterday was the first time they've ever met. Brian spoke to me about Pete, and he has spoke openly about just how great of a defensive line coach Pete is. But they had never met until yesterday. They had spoke on the phone, but never met. So it goes to show you kind of the small world you live in. And again, I don't know what's going to happen there. And at 82, like you said, Mike, I got energy now. I can't tell you what's going to happen by Friday. So, Pete is Pete, man. He got some stuff with him. So, again, though, it's an underachieving group along that defensive line. They're getting pushed around, and Ole Miss pushed them around.
Yeah, they did.
Man, they got no pass rush at all on Jackson Dart, and I thought Jackson played his best game I've ever seen in an Ole Miss uniform.
Yeah.
Against LSU. Really played well. And what more could you ask of Jaden Daniels for LSU? I mean, he made throws almost like you talk about put the ball in a bucket. Ole Miss corners, they were right there. And he dropped that ball in there just like, throwing a ball in a bucket. Remarkable to see, and yet in a losing effort. So I think Brian recognized he needed to get some help for Jancic up front along the defensive line, and bringing in Pete, I think will help. How much, that remains to be seen. And they got a tough opponent this week. I sort of felt Missouri was kind of the assassin waiting in the wings for them, because you're playing on their turf, 11 o'clock. Their defense is legit. And, man, they got a pitch-and-catch combination that is really good. And LSU's weakness certainly is they have not been able to get a pass rush, but their secondary is flat-out awful. It's no more DBU anymore.
No, it's not. Okay. What with this Bama A&M game? I know they both have a loss, but they're good. Pretty damn good football teams, and both of them have good defenses. I'm expecting a kind of old style smash mouth SEC football game in College Station. What are you looking for, Mike D?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the surprise has been how good A&M's defense has been this year. They've got a lot of talented guys on offense. Now, Casey goes down, so a guy I know pretty well, Max Johnson, has taken over at quarterback, and he was here at LSU. But man, their defense has courted them. They get pressure. They can run the field extremely well. And man, this is, for Jalen Milroe, this is a huge test. He got one against Texas. And now he's got another one now against A&M. It's not so much for all the hype in the offseason about Bobby Petrino and Jimbo's offense. Who has really courted them this year after really a tough loss against the Hurricanes has been their defense. In the last couple of weeks, you watch them. They swarm to the football, and they got guys that can run the field and get pressure on the quarterback. And so I expect this will be a low-scoring game between the two of them. I would be shocked the way both offenses are run today, that they'd be able to put up a lot of points. And if you go back and look, the one team that has really played Alabama off their feet the last few years has been A&M.
No doubt.
Jimbo knows a lot of what Nick likes to run offensively and sort of has a feel for what he likes to do defensively. And they have played them very tough, and these outcomes have come down to the end. And even as bad as A&M was a year ago, look what happened at the end of that game.
Yeah.
A&M had a shot, a legit shot.
So the winner of Bama and A&M you have is the lead dog in the SEC West. The loser will have only one conference loss. Will you put the loser ahead of Ole Miss or behind Ole Miss, depending on who wins, Bama and A&M?
Yeah, it would depend on who won that game. But, again, this is not your normal Alabama team. Yeah. Certainly on offense. It's not what you've seen in the past. Defensively, they have gotten better. And the funny thing is, the last place Pete Jenkins worked with was Alabama. Because when Nick gets in a little bit of trouble on defense, he makes that one phone call to the Wolf, because that's his nickname, the Wolf, and he calls Pete about what we should do. And, man, they've gotten it fixed up defensively after a real difficult start. So, man, A&M, I think, has got a legit shot to win this game. I really believe that, because their defense is smothering, and they can run to the football. I think the question mark is going to come to which team makes the big mistakes on offense and turns the ball over. And Max has always been very protective of throwing the football. He's a little erratic throwing it, but he's always protective of the ball. Milroe's a different style quarterback in that, he wants to get things out to the edge and uses great athleticism to beat you. Well, against A&M, they may have more athletes than any other team Alabama will face on defense all year long in the regular season. I mean, A&M's got some players. It's never been a question mark about talent at A&M. It's been about motivation and focus, and can you put them in the right spot? But, man, what I've seen the last 2 weeks has been really impressive on defense, and I think they're going to give Alabama a lot of trouble.
Mike Detillier on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, LSU Saints insider, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. Tough week for Louisiana and New Orleans. Okay, Mike, Arkansas at Ole Miss. Are you expecting Ole Miss to blow their doors off?
I think this game will be closer than you might think. A lot of times after a big emotional win, you wonder a little bit about, can you get the emotion and the focus right back on your team? Arkansas has not played well at all. They've been god-awful on defense. And so, surprisingly, has been they haven't won up front along the offensive line. That is, that's been Sam Pittman's wheelhouse. He goes down one of the top offensive line coaches over the last 25 years in major college football. The offensive line, which is littered with a lot of young kids, man, a ton of penalties, a ton of them up front. And, man, watching them against LSU, what KJ Jefferson did, despite the fact I think they had 10 penalties for their offensive line as a whole, and still was close. I mean, they had a shot late in that game until Jaden Daniels and LSU's offense put it away. That they don't look like the Arkansas we've seen in the past. Really don't. And those teams always were pretty good up front. Now, they can get after the quarterback pretty good. I will say that. They got some rushers that can put a lot of pressure. But, if I'm Ole Miss and I watch that game of the last couple weeks with them, their offensive line really got pushed around, and their defensive line, teams were able to run the ball on them. So, man, that was the surprise with Ole Miss, how well they ran the football. After really struggling the first couple weeks to run the football, man, Ole Miss ran the ball at will at LSU.
They did.
When they wanted to and when they had to. And getting Trey Harris back healthy, I think, is such a big plus, too. And he wanted to play this game, and I get it. He's a Louisiana guy, was not recruited by LSU, not once but twice, because when he left Louisiana Tech, LSU didn't have that scholarship out either. So I get that. But I think Trey makes so much of a difference because now you can't have that safety sit in the box. You got to respect the deep ball ability of Trey Harris and what he can do for you to stretch the field. And quarterbacks get spurty. And watching Jackson, I was really impressed with him throwing the football. LSU's secondary is not great, but he was accurate. He knew where to go with the football, and he was decisive. If that stays the same, man, Ole Miss is legit. Again, defensively, a couple of those passes for touchdowns were just remarkable throws by Daniels. You're not going to face a guy like him every week. And
Right.
KJ's different. But KJ's a big man. You better get a hat on him because he's 6'3", and he says he's 240, but I think he's bigger than that. He's a big man. When he came to Manning, it was like, whoa, am I interviewing a defensive end or a quarterback? Because he was a big, big guy. And, you could see he kind of separated himself from a lot of the other guys with his physicality. But, they've tried to change offenses. I think they've tried to just tweak it a little bit to get him to be more what he was of a year ago and being able to use his movement skills. Keeping him in the pocket was a big mistake early on. They did that against BYU, and it
No
didn't
kidding.
work. It was awful to watch. But they've started to move him a little bit around and let him be KJ Jefferson. He's got some speed out of the wide receiver positions, but they haven't been able to run the football like we've seen in the past. And part of that, too, is the injury to Rocket at running back. And their offensive line isn't nearly as good as we've seen the last few years.
Yeah. All right, I've got 2 minutes. The Saints, we talked about this during the offseason, the schedule. This was Dennis Allen's time, the NFC South, and pulling the AFC South. Are you still optimistic after this weekend? What do they need to do and fast?
Optimistic after what I saw? I wouldn't use that term. Can they still make a run at this? Yes. Because I think the NFC South is not a good division. The shocking part has been how good Tampa has played on offense with Baker Mayfield. I mean, if everybody's honest about it, I don't think anybody thought Baker would play this good. But the Saints' schedule is very favorable. You've got Kamara back. I would not have played Derek Carr. I thought that was a bad decision to play him. I think you play with the guy that's practiced all week in Jameis Winston.
Mm-hmm.
None of this horse hockey, what they were trying to sell you on TV about Derek Carr's back 100%. Come on, he ain't close to that. So they got to win with defense, special teams, but you got to score. You got to score points. Well, you ain't winning nothing in this league if you can't score. That is the big question mark on where the spark is going to come from offensively.
Ooh, okay. So they got to get to the playoffs. They pulled the easy schedule. Now Tampa, like you said, Baker's playing well. Yikes. All right, as far as staying in the NFC, do you like I got a minute or so. Do you like the 49ers better or the Eagles better, Mike D?
Well, I picked the 49ers to play Kansas City in the Super Bowl, so I'm a ride with San Francisco. Their defense is really good. They've gotten McCaffrey now entrenched in their offense. And, man, they got some weapons. I mean, with Deebo Samuel and Ayuk and Kittle and Purdy's played well. But they win up front. Both of all, we can talk about the toys all you want. They win because their offensive and defensive lines are so good. And I could say the same about the Eagles. But I like San Francisco a tad better than Philly. And, for Philly to be undefeated is unusual for a team to go to the Super Bowl and lose and jump off to this fast start. Normally, there's a little bit of a drop-off. I haven't seen it. I really haven't.
Good grief. Talking about two well-run organizations in the Eagles and the 49ers. All right, 30 seconds, Mike D. Can Kentucky hang within 10 points of Georgia?
Yeah, I think that's a close game. Georgia's offense has shown some flaws, but in the end, Georgia's going to end up winning that game. But I think it's tight. I think it's close. And Kentucky can run the football. How well they can throw it, I think, is the big question mark. And if you can't throw the football against Georgia, you got no chance. Zero. You just can't rely on the running game. I think Georgia wins this in a very, very close game.
Two smash mouth games. Bama at A&M, Kentucky at Georgia. There we go. And we'll see if Ole Miss hangs half 100 on Arkansas. I can't believe Nick Saban and Brian Kelly didn't hire Brad White, defensive coordinator at Kentucky. The guys, I mean, considering what he has to work with, he's just a freak. Mike D, thank you, buddy.
Thank you, Bo. Appreciate it.
Mike Detillier, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. Brought to you by SoundCommAV.com, Sound and Communications. They can make your conference room pop. Obviously, sound systems, churches, business, all kinds of sports facilities, football stadiums, arenas, gymnasiums, baseball field, softball field, you name it. SoundCommAV.com, the leader in audio and visual sound and communications, right there in Rankin County in Pearl. SoundCommAV.com. We are the Out of Bounds Show, hour number 3 coming up. I'm your host, Bo Bounds. Jason's here, kind of.